Welcome back to my channel. And if you are visiting this space for the first time, you are also highly welcome. This is quiz time. And in this section, we'll be looking at some structured questions that are related to the pelvic floor or the pelvic diaphragm. This will prepare us for questions that are related to the pelvic floor, the pelvic diaphragm in any examination. I would also want to suggest that we go and watch lecture video on the pelvic floor, the pelvic diaphragm before attempting this quiz section. The first question here reads that the pelvic diaphragm marks the superior limit of the true pelvis. The second option here states that the pelvic diaphragm separates the greater pelvis from the lesser pelvis. The third option here reads that the pelvic diaphragm marks the inferior limit of the true pelvis, while the last option here reads that the pelvic diaphragm separates the abdominal cavity from the greater pelvis. Out of all these options, the correct option here is the pelvic diaphragm marks the inferior limit of the true pelvis. By now, we should know where the true pelvis is located. And inferior to this space, we have the alignment of the pelvic floor or the pelvic diaphragm. And this is where it is seen to mark the inferior limit of this region. So this is the correct option here. The second question reads that the functions of the pelvic floor, the pelvic diaphragm include, does it include the fact that it supports pelvic viscera, or is it seen to control the process of defecation, or is it seen to support sphincteric control, or is it all of the above? So regarding or concerning the functions of the pelvic floor, the pelvic diaphragm, all the options that are listed here are correct. So the correct option here is all of the above. The pelvic floor, the pelvic diaphragm is located at the inferior region of the true pelvis. And we know that within the true pelvis, we have a number of pelvic viscera. And this is where it is helping to put these structures in place. In this regard, it's helping to support the pelvic viscera. It's also seen to control the process of defecation. We know that within the pelvic floor, the pelvic diaphragm, we have the rectal hiatus. And it is through this rectal hiatus that the anal canal will pass through. And of course, around this region, it's also helping to control the process of defecation. Also, the pelvic floor, the pelvic diaphragm is seen to support sphincteric control because we have a number of structures that need to pass through the pelvic floor, the pelvic diaphragm, so as to be able to release their content out of the body. And this is where they create hiatuses within the pelvic floor or the pelvic diaphragm. And a very good example of this structure is the urethra and also the vaginal canal. So because of the fact that they pass through it, they are helping to also control the passage of structures along the lumen of these organs. And this is where they act as providing support for sphincteric control. So all these options that are listed here are correct. So the correct option is all of the above. The third question reads that the pelvic floor, the pelvic diaphragm is structurally made up of what? So what are the structural components of the pelvic floor or the pelvic diaphragm? And the first option here is the puborectalis and also the iliococcygeus muscle. Is it the puborectalis and the coccygeus muscle? Is it the levator ani and the coccygeus muscle? Or is it the levator ani and the puborectalis? So out of all these options, the correct option here is the levator ani and the coccygeus muscle. The pelvic floor, the pelvic diaphragm is structurally made up of the levator ani muscle and also the coccygeus muscle. We know that the levator ani muscle itself is structurally made up of 3 subunits. So we have 3 muscles coming together to form the levator ani muscle. And this with the coccygeus muscle is what then forms the structural component of the pelvic floor or the pelvic diaphragm. So this is the correct option here. The fourth question reads that the following statements concerning the levator ani muscle are correct, except the fact that it forms the major component of the pelvic floor, or is it except the fact that it contributes to form a midline raphe, or is it except it functions as a single unit, or is it except the fact that it is located on the lateral pelvic wall? So all these options concerning the levator ani muscle are correct, except the fact that it is located on the lateral pelvic wall. The levator ani muscle is seen to mark the inferior limit of the true pelvis, and it is not restricted to the lateral wall of the pelvic floor. Question 5. Remember, we already established that the levator ani muscle is structurally made up of 3 subunits. We say that we have 3 muscles coming together to form this levator ani muscle. So let's look at this option to highlight the different structural components of the levator ani muscle. So the levator ani muscle, we say, is made up of the following, except the ischiococcygous muscle? Is it except the pubococcygous muscle? Is it except the puborectalis muzzle? Or is it except the iliococcygous muscle? Which of this muscle is not seen to contribute to the formation of the levator ani muscle? This is what this question represents. And the incorrect option here is ischiococcygous muscle. The ischiococcygous muscle is also referred to as a coccygous muscle. This muscle is not seen to contribute to the structural component of the levator ani muscle, while the remaining 3 listed here, the pubococcygous, the puborectalis, and the iliococcygous muscle, are the 3 muscles that come together to form the levator ani muscle. So the ischiococcygous muscle is not seen to contribute to the formation of the levator ani muscle. Hence, this is the correct option here. Question 6 reads that the puborectalis muscle originates from the pubic symphysis and is inserted on the coccyx. Or is it the puborectalis muscle is a U-shaped sling that originates from the body of the pubic bone, and you see it encircling the rectum? Or the puborectalis muscle, is it seen to originate from the ischial spine, and you see it inserted on the coccyx? Or you see that the puborectalis muscle has its fibers originating from the pubic symphysis, and you see it finally inserted on the sacrum. So which of these options here represents the true orientation of the puborectalis? The correct option here is the fact that the puborectalis muscle is a U-shaped sling that is seen to originate from the bodies of the pubic bone, and you see it encircling the rectum. This is the option here that represents the true characteristics of the puborectalis. The 7th question reads that the coccygous muscle is located at the anterior region of the levator ani muscle, or the coccygous muscle, is it seen to form part of the levator ani muscle? The coccygous muscle, is it seen to originate from the pubic symphysis and finally inserted on the coccyx? Or is the coccygous muscle also referred to as the ischiococcygous muscle, and it is seen to be located at the posterior region of the levator ani muscle? So which of these options best describe the coccygous muscle? The correct option here is the fact that the coccygous muscle can also be referred to as the ischiococcygous muscle, and it is seen to be located at the posterior region of the levator ani muscle. This is the fact that represents the true characteristics of the coccygous muscle. Remember, we said that this coccygous muscle and the levator ani muscle is what is seen to structurally form the pelvic floor or the pelvic diaphragm. So this is the most correct option here as it relates to the coccygous muscle. Question 8 states that the innervation of the pelvic floor is mainly by, is it mainly by the pudendal nerve? Is it mainly by the tibial nerve? Is it mainly by the superior gluteal nerve? Or is it mainly by the nerve to the obliterator internus? So which of these nerves provides innervation for the pelvic floor or the pelvic diaphragm? The correct option here is the pudendal nerve. The pudendal nerve is what gives innervation to the pelvic floor, the pelvic diaphragm. The pudendal nerve is one of the branches from the sacral plexus. The 9th question reads that the pelvic floor or the pelvic diaphragm gives openings to the following structures except, is it except the urethra? Is it except the rectum? Is it except the hiatus? Or is it except the vaginal canal? So which of these options here are not seen to create opening within the pelvic floor or the pelvic diaphragm? And the correct option here is the aorta. So it is except the aorta out of all these options listed that is not seen to create opening on the pelvic floor or the pelvic diaphragm. The aorta is already seen to have bifurcated before reaching this specific region. So the aorta is not even seen around this region. So the other options here, which include the urethra, the rectum, and also the vaginal canal, are seen to create hiatuses, which are holes within the pelvic floor, the pelvic diaphragm. So they need to pierce through the pelvic floor or the pelvic diaphragm. So all these options, they are correct except the aorta. The last question, which is the 10th question, reads that the levator prostatae is a modification of what? The levator prostatae is a modification of one of the muscles of the pelvic floor, the pelvic diaphragm, and it is seen to be inserted on the wall of the prostate gland. This is where the name is so drafted from. So specifically, which of these muscles is seen to provide a modification that is referred to as the levator prostatae? Is it the puborectalis? Is it the coccygeus? Is it the iliococcygeus? Or is it the pubococcygeus? Out of all these options, the correct one here is the pubococcygeus muscle. The pubococcygeus muscle is seen to create emergence of fibers that are transformed into the levator prostatae. So this is the correct option here. Let's have your grades in the comment section, and thanks for watching.